strong soybean rallies, a crazy market of corn, and yet his forecast for the USDA WASDE report. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So the one that's going to explain you is Jerry Gidel from Midland Research. And stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. So Jerry, how are you today? As we speak, we are about to get the WASDE report in the coming weeks, but also we had the news that the Argentinian government suspended corn exports until March.
Well, that definitely, we just was actually kind of looking forward to things changing in the year's export world down there with finally some agreement between the oilseed processors and their workers, and that, which had also impacted the export inspectors there in Rosario and that. And so as that was kind of finally coming to fruition, then after that agreement was announced, then which was, good, we're going to actually get some stuff moving here, and things that are in the port will be cleared out and we can get back to operating. Surprise, surprise, the Argentine government decided that, well, let's not do any additional exports till March 1. So whatever you got on the books and that. And I assume at this point that means that any of the ships that were there waiting will still be able to get their shipments out, but no new shipments will be approved. So yeah, there's always a lot of confusions in these kinds of things, but highly unusual. And that goes along with the Russians deciding to put a tax on their exports starting in February 1 and maybe restricting the actual shipments in that. So the world is getting more and more concerned about supplies, and in the classic sense of it, humans and governments all decided it's time to hoard. And so we're in that mode right now.
What else is playing a big factor on corn right now?
Well, I think the other major factor in this thing is the conditions and weather prospects in South America, and primarily it's right there in Argentina, same location. Maybe that's also was part of the government's decision that things were not looking very good. Now, the thing is interesting. There's kind of two stages of corn planting in Argentina. They have a certain amount that's planted in the typical kind of spring situation, and then there's a second stage. The first stage of the corn right now is in kind of tough shape here. This is a timing where heat and dryness is not good. It's kind of pollination. It's in that stage of life. In the growth cycle, and so that's impacting the first crop. And then the other issue is if this La Nina really does bear down on southern Brazil and Argentina, and that could also impact in the amount of seedings that's going to go forward. So I think in subtle ways, the strength that we've seen in corn relative to beans, it's really impacted that in the last 10 days to maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And that has really, I think, come from that situation where Argentina's crop has become highly important in here. And that now the interesting twist on it is that the U.S. carryover stocks are down substantially from what they've been, but the 1.7 billion, I should say, stocks is not like super tight. Well, there's some things going on that we'll get into more details about how that's going forward. But weather in South America is highly important. I think also the situation in Brazil and their second crop corn because of the late plantings and that's caused on beans is also going to be a factor. Right now, though, that's out on the horizon. It's not here right in our doorstep.
Yes, let's jump into the oil seed right now. We had a very strong rally and we reached the $13 level. What do you think is behind all of that?
Well, as I mentioned recently, in that once we went above $12, there's been kind of a long-term history of the markets getting concerned, and the prices start to accelerate at a faster rate. We moved to $13 very quickly, and then today we kind of went right on by it from that standpoint. To some extent, the issues on soybeans from the standpoint of the impact on the U.S. supplies and to some extent the world supplies is a little more critical in the short term about near-term supplies than that. How are we going to get this all sorted out? In the U.S. And to some extent even in Argentina is the issue of being able to have enough protein internally to feed your livestock and things like that. The Chinese, they've been a buyer of the U.S. supplies that they're shipping now, and the one thing, don't forget, the Chinese were a huge buyer of South American beans for this coming year. So they've got some supplies out there already on the books from Brazil for the shipments that we're going to see starting in March, April, and May of this year. The twist of it is right now, we're uncertain as to what size of the final crop's going to be in the U.S. I'm guessing we're going to be 35 million lower. When you have 175 million, that makes things interesting. And also the fact that today actually we went over 2 billion in sales on the weekly U.S. update, and that so we're in a situation where the USDA's supply demand is probably going to have to go up at least 25 to 35 million because of that. Now, the twist right now, too, is that there's another slush thing that's been around and people kind of lose track of it, is the residual in soybeans, and that's going to come down from 40 million that they've been using, and that'll compensate. But in reality is, I'm not anticipating that carryover stock on the USDA here on January 12th to get much below the 135 million number. And that is still a surprisingly tight number. And so it's the concept of rallying prices high enough that we start to use something else. Unfortunately, protein is not one of those easy ones to ration as much as starches like corn and wheat.
Yes, we had a long positive cycle until 2014, and that's where we got right now with soybeans. We had the best prices since 2014. So, do you think we are getting from again in that long cycle, or you think it's really hard to tell right now?
Well, I have to say, there's going to be plenty of volatility, and I do think that there's a chance that we could advance these prices over the next month or 6 weeks, or maybe even into February. It's highly, highly important as to how the South American output turns out to be. And soybeans are traditionally are a pretty hardy crop when it comes to dryness. Now, the key thing, though, is that it's a timing feature. What happened in the U.S. this last year was that it came late in the filling stage, and so that shrunk the bean size, and that shrunk the number of pounds we had from the crop. And I don't know. The other major factor, and it's also impacting we just talked about the corn there having a secondary part of that crop being planted after wheat. There's a huge amount of soybeans in Argentina that are also planted in after wheat, and right now it's in jeopardy of not planting it, and that's a major factor. If you don't put it in the ground, you can't get anything out of it, and that's the real key on soybeans in Argentina going forward right now. And also to some extent the impact of maybe some small plants being damaged. But in general, the soybean side of things, I think we're going to find out where we're at on output potential nearer than we are on U.S. or excuse me, in world corn supplies, because of the fact that Brazil is still the behemoth out there on their second crop corn out of Mato Grosso, and we're not even thinking about that till mid to late February, and will it get planted? And that's 6 or 8 weeks away.
Yes, I checked a little bit on those numbers that you sent me, that you are trying to forecast the waste report for the next January 12th.
Mm-hmm.
And you put corn and soybean production is slightly below the USDA forecast. Why is that?
Well, I guess if you look at back history on this, once we've started in the type of year we're in here, where we had very high numbers back in April, or excuse me, in August, and that they tend to, and particularly the kind of weather we had, as I mentioned, the late season situation on beans started to pull things back, and interestingly enough, we've kind of went down in September hard, then we stayed the same in October. Then we had the harvest, and it went down sharply again in both of them, and so I'd say now in general here, I'm not, my 1 bushel off on corn and my 4/10 of a bushel on beans are minor numbers, but when we're in this stage of the situation, particularly in beans, when you're down with this tremendous amount of stuff on the boards here for export and the strong domestic crush statistics we have, it does make things quite interesting and impacts things. To some extent, I think the one thing too that comes into these final numbers is how the stocks numbers look and how they relate to the output that's out there. And that's another check that the USDA uses when they're kind of finalizing their last U.S. output numbers. And that, interesting enough, a 35 million adjustment in beans and an 80 million jump, or decline, I should say, or 82 million, I think I used, in corn. Not the big numbers. What do we do with exports? What do we do with domestic usage like ethanol or soybean crush? Those are the ones that are important. That's going to ultimately have an impact. And higher prices you are, hopefully that means prices are higher. People are a little more audacious, as they say, on actually utilizing the products in that. And I think that's definitely the thing we're in right now. Soybeans at this point, as I said, weather in South America and the concerns about the world crop size is going to be huge, though, as we go forward.
But for wheat, you didn't make any changes in that.
Yeah, in I haven't really got a complete look at the stocks numbers at this point, but in general, we've been moving along on target. They did increase the exports last month. I don't think they'll change them that much. And the one thing it does normally, just like 99% of the time, they don't make changes on the U.S. U.S. wheat production numbers, because they do that involved with the small grains report in late September. So that usually carries through. Now, the big thing in the wheat market, it's in the U.S. and it's around the world here, is this: what does the crop start to look like for 2021-22? The Russian crop was put in under somewhat limited moisture in that. I think that might be a factor by why the Russians decided to put their limits on exports for this year, and then even here in the U.S., the weather situations have been iffy in the western parts of the U.S. plains. Now, some places have got some rains along the way, and the interesting twist on it is that if these prices stay strong in sorghum and corn and things of that nature, some of those acres that were planted or might be reported as seeded on the January report that comes out the same day as these other USDA final production and supply demand reports, for winter wheat, that might not even be harvested because, man, that sorghum price is getting pretty attractive. You've got a kind of sorry looking wheat crop out there. They might be ripped up next spring, but that's to come to that decision. We've probably got a few more weeks to look at all the way out into March before that decision is finally made on what the final harvested levels will be on U.S. Planted wheat and that type of thing. The world situation, we've got the biggest problem with wheat on a worldwide situation is it seems like about every 2 or 3 months we got someplace that's harvesting wheat, and we get North America. We just recently got done with Australia, and then we come back around again. In general, and also the world stocks are not hugely tight at this point. I guess the biggest wild card in this whole thing is, will the Chinese decide to start feeding some of that wheat that they have in their stocks? And boy, I don't have a clue on that one, so they will or won't, but that would help instead of buying U.S. corn. But so far they bought a lot of U.S. corn, and I think that's the biggest problem I have with corn on a worldwide basis and exports from USA. We've got to do 60 million a week from today. That's huge. We've been doing 25 to 35 million on a weekly basis, and 60 million, that means every week from now until next September. We got a long ways to go. We've got only about 500, maybe a little under 600 million shipped out the door so far, and we got to do 2 million more of shipments, and that's a tall order. Hopefully we can get it all done. I think we can, but that's the other reason why I'm not sure we're going to see an increase in my exports on corn that you saw those expectations I put on that supply demand thing earlier today. So yeah, a lot of challenges out here for the U.S. and the world to try to get this all figured out and how it's all going to happen. Hopefully we'll get a complete understanding of the world on January 12th, but I doubt we'll even find out then.
That's okay, Mr. Jerry Gidel. Happy New Year.
Yes, thank you, Luis, and you have a fantastic one down there, and enjoy I guess some fireworks. Nobody can go outside and then in a big crowd. We can look at that on television. I guess they're doing it here in Times Square. I guess we get to look out the window and our TVs and see what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Take care. Good to be with you.